Hello everyone, and welcome to our presentation titled Drawing the Line, Keeping Colorism Out of the Classroom. My name is Paris Love, and this was a collaborative effort with my colleague Kevin Stewart. The layout of our presentation will be to provide a brief introduction into the topic of colorism, a review of relevant literature, a discussion around things that educators can do to keep colorism out of the classroom, and wrap up with some final thoughts and include areas for further examination. Introduction. If you're white, you're all right. If you're yellow, you're mellow. If you're brown, stick around. If you're black, get back. What does pine wood slab, a fine-tooth comb, and a brown paper bag have in common? A strange combination, we can agree. Yet, not so long ago, these were the methods of ascertaining if one was too dark, too light, or just right. Do we have our priorities wrong? In the year 2017, is there still an issue among African Americans and society in general in regards to colorism? Are we concerned with the tone of our skin rather than intellect? Are we still judging people based on skin tone? These are the questions we need to ask ourselves in order to ascertain some realism to the prejudices among African Americans and other people of color. The purpose of this presentation is to offer a brief review of the colorism literature in an effort to provide a contextual basis, demonstrate the pervasiveness of this issue, and discuss strategies that educators may employ to minimize this persistent societal problem in classrooms. This is an important gap in the research to explore because colorism, though a societal issue, need not have implications in the classroom if steps are taken by educators to ensure that all students receive the same educational experience regardless of lightness or darkness of skin. Literature review. Colorism is a distribution of privilege and disadvantage based on lightness or darkness of one's skin. Colorism not only affects African Americans, but also Latinos, Asian Americans, and others from ethnic groups in which their skin tones and/or features are considered non-white. Skin tone, hair texture, eye color, and whether you have a narrow nose versus a broad nose affect perceived darkness or light skin of an individual. This is also what makes colorism difficult to recognize, as it is a complex societal issue that impacts a broad range of people. It has been suggested that colorism in the United States dates back to slavery when light-skinned slaves were favored over dark-skinned slaves. Two prominent historical viewpoints are that dark-skinned African American slaves were considered by whites to be less attractive, lazy, and unintelligent. Light-skinned African American slaves, on the other hand, were seen as more attractive, intelligent, and capable. The result is light-skinned African Americans were afforded privileges and preferential treatment that included more liberty, education, among other things. So this can be very confusing. Our perception is our reality. Since slavery, colorism in the United States has ballooned into a dynamic, oftentimes unrecognized, except for those on the receiving end, force that spans many ethnic groups due to a growing diversity in American culture. Do we base success on the color of our skin or the amount of money we have in our bank account? Quote, there is a direct correlation between higher levels of wealth, health, education, and status and lighter complexion. End quote. There is no coincidence based on the colorism research over years, as studies have shown that light-skinned or more white individuals are destined for greater prosperity and social standing as a result of enjoying a more privileged life. Discussion. Given the literature on colorism, one would be hard-pressed to argue that colorism and racism are things of the past, as the research tells a different story. Despite the argument that, quote, the country is moving away from the blunt force racism that once banished black people to the other side of the Jim Crow line to a period of secondary discrimination or colorism that would be difficult to overthrow, end quote. Educators can draw the line by taking steps to ensure that colorism is kept out of the classrooms. This is a vital part in ensuring that every student receives equal education opportunities regardless of their skin tone, which is something that every student deserves. Ultimately, the goal for educators is to actively check for patterns of behavior that are consistent with the separation of individuals based on skin tone, because these can in fact result in teachable moments. It's this type of self-monitoring and correcting that would be essential for keeping colorism at bay. So there is a four-step process. As with correcting any problem, the first step that educators need to take is to acknowledge that colorism exists, as evidenced in the literature presented in this presentation. Oftentimes, diverse social issues such as this lend themselves to people not acknowledging their existence or looking the other way unless they or someone they know are directly impacted by them. Not to mention that no one wants to be thought of as treating people differently based on skin tone, as that would be considered borderline racist behavior. This in and itself can be a cause for hesitation in accepting that colorism exists, but it is vital for educators to move beyond the stumbling block in order to make strides in keeping colorism out of the classroom. The second step for educators to take is to be fair and equitable in the amount of time and attention given to each student. On the surface, this may sound simple. However, it is important to understand that light-skinned or more white students have lived a privileged life, and as an outcome of this, colorism when compared to dark-skinned students. Therefore, it is reasonable to conclude that they may have a greater level of confidence to interact more with their professors in and out of the classroom. The outcome of this could ultimately be some dark-skinned students not receiving an equitable amount of time or attention from their professors because they do not speak up as much during class discussion or lack the comfort level to reach out to professors outside of the classroom. In regards to treatment, it should be made clear here that the idea is not for educators to intentionally treat dark-skinned students differently or better, as that would essentially be reverse colorism, which is equally unfair. Not to mention that could lead to a slippery slope in which more white students are adversely affected. Rather, the third step for educators to take is to strive to create inclusive classroom environments in which all students feel empowered to participate and contribute. This may require revisiting lecture or discussion materials and topics to ensure that all students can relate. Classroom climate is also important because it should be welcoming to put apprehensive students at ease. Last, but certainly not least, the fourth step that educators can take is to adopt a variety of engagement strategies and techniques to draw more students into the classroom activity and discussions. As I'm sure we can all agree, it can be very common for the same outspoken students to dominate every classroom activity or discussion. However, as educators, it is imperative to get the whole class involved. This may require some creativity, such as dividing the class into smaller teams or groups so that less confident students might find their voice. Rather than calling on or interacting with the same few students, it can be necessary to make your way around the entire class, interacting with everyone, and perhaps even directly engaging less vocal students. Nevertheless, to say that these are just some starter ideas, as the goal is to convey the necessity to be creative and think outside the box in attempting to pull more students into classroom activity and discussion, because more engaged students tend to do better at their coursework. To recap, we've outlined 4 steps that educators can take to keep colorism out of the classroom, which is equally as important. Step 1 is to acknowledge that colorism exists. This involves moving past any personal stumbling blocks to recognize that the presence of this societal problem. Step 2 is to be fair and equitable in the amount of time and attention given to each student. Step 3 is to create an inclusive classroom environment where all students feel welcome, supported, and empowered to participate and contribute. Step 4 is to adopt a variety of engagement strategies and techniques to draw more students into the classroom activities and discussions. For our conclusion, our paper will be available in the proceedings for further review and reference. So where do we go from here? It goes without saying that much has been written on colorism over the years, since it has been a part of our culture for such a long time, and its impact can be felt by so many people. As noted at the onset of this presentation, a gap in the colorism research exists. One can readily find literature on colorism across a variety of areas, including both social and economic spaces as well as in the classroom. However, further exploration is needed in regards to colorism in academia. Researchers state not so much as to whether colorism exists in academia, because the answer to this is no, but rather the impact of colorism on student engagement, learning, and outcomes. Valuable insight can be gleaned from these studies in these areas because that knowledge may provide clearer insight into how to best support students within the groups that are impacted by colorism, improve retention efforts, and ultimately graduation rates. So should our past dictate our future? We have to banish the gap on colorism because colorism does not belong in the classroom. And we are all aware that knowledge is power. These are the references that were presented in our paper, and we thank you for your time.